So now we are starting this T7 handover webinar. So, welcome to you all who joined this webinar, which marks a handover of the Think 7 presidency from Japan to Italy. So we are starting from ADBI Dean's opening remarks. So ADBI's Dean Sonobe has led the T7 Japan process as a chair and worked together with the task force co-chairs. Many of you are joining here, as well as advisory council members and ADBI colleagues who acted as a secretariat and coordinators to establish the status of this new G7 engagement group by think tankers to be a truly meaningful supporting system for the global policy discussion. Dean, floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Kaori-san. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. So good evening from Tokyo. I'm absolutely delighted that I'm spending time with so many participants who are interested in Think 7. Thank you for your participation in the long process of the T7 Japan 2023. Thank you for your interest in what this process has created. And thank you for your interest in the T7 Italy, which is now starting. Warm welcome to this handover event. As many of you would see, I have enjoyed enormously every moment of the T7 process throughout this 1 year, feeling like we are making progress after progress, expanding this wonderful forum for discussion among individuals and think tanks that want to make this planet a better place to live for us and future generations. These people have an open mind and the willingness to participate in not only T7, but also other fora, including T20, for such a discussion. Their engagement helps to bridge G7 and G20, creating a nice convergence between the two processes, and eventually a more peaceful, productive, and prosperous world. We started the process right after the T7 handover from Germany to Japan webinar on 31st of October last year. After that, the major events, many major events took place, including the T7 Japan Inception Conference in December, Bellagio Retreat in March this year, T7 Summit in April, T7 Japan Communique handover to the G7 President, Mr. Kishida, in April, T7, Civil 7, Women 7, Pride 7, Youth 7. By the way, Pride 7 means LGBTQ group. So the joint press conference with these people at the G7 Hiroshima Summit in May, T7 special session at the Global Solutions Summit, Berlin in May, G7 and G20 conference held by EIE, T7 sessions at the T20 India Inception Conference in Delhi, Mid-Year Conference in Mumbai, and the summit in Mysore, and my participation representing T7 at the Global Policy Forum held by ISPI in Milan, and several other or many other events. So I'd like to mention the architecture of the T7 Japan quickly. It had the 4 task forces with 3 co-chairs per task force and the task force coordinators, who are mostly ADBI young staff members. And attention was paid to the gender balance in the selection of task force co-chairs. The architecture was shaped with the great help of the International Advisory Council, where advisors gave me a lot of valuable suggestions about the importance of continuity from Germany to Japan and then Italy, the importance of efforts toward convergence with T20 or strong collaboration with T20, especially T20 under the presidency of emerging market economies, namely Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and the importance of openness and inclusiveness to include think tanks from the global south, and so on. So all the success of the T7 Japan owes very much to the insights provided by the members of International Advisory Council. Thank you very much. The output as documents is, of course, great. It includes 16 policy briefs and 4 issue papers and 1 communique. These numbers are small, but the quality of these documents are very high. And thank you very much for all the authors, task force co-chairs, and coordinators. Let me mention the titles of issue papers. The first is Barriers to Development and Prosperity in the Global South and How the G7 Can Help. Second, Well-being, Environmental Sustainability, and Just Transition. Third, Science and Digitalization for a Better Future. And the fourth is Building Comprehensive Global Security, Harnessing the Unexplored G7, G20 Synergy. I guess those are, authors, the task force co-chairs, as well as the coordinators, are now crying with a kind of the happy feeling. Congratulations and thank you very much. And besides, we had collaboration with other engagement groups. So T7, Pride 7, C7, W7, and the Youth 7 issued joint statement entitled Reigniting the 2030 Agenda, Achieving Gender Equality Now and for Future Generations. And the engagement groups, not only these 4 that I just mentioned, are very strong, then also more broader than this. For example, we had kind of joint effort with Science 7 and Labor 7, and not really business, but Business 7 also came to kind of reception at the T7 Japan Summit. So this is one of the important messages to T7 Italy. So the engagement with other groups, other engagement groups is very important and can be a very powerful tool for making something, impactful result. And now G7, G20 bridging activities resulted in the formation of the so-called Bellagio format and the shared summary of the G20, G7 retreat entitled A Matter of Peace, a joint initiative by ADBI and the Rockefeller Foundation in March, and also T7 Japan, T20 India working documents entitled Reigniting the 2030 Agenda in September and November this year, based on the convening held in the Rockefeller Foundation headquarters in New York. Thank you very much, the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you deeply for the cross collaboration. And I would like to draw some lessons. First, T7 Japan envisioned as a supplementary or additional global forum to the T20 process to empower think tanks in the world. Such fora where think tanks talk to each other across boundaries are so limited and in number, and hence they are valuable, and that so valuable that every member of the global think tank community should always try to find an opportunity to increase such fora. And second, it is possible and necessary to improve this unique ability of think tanks to talk to each other across boundaries, so that we can produce more evidence-based and stronger recommendations and guidance to policymakers for good policy designs. And third, convergence of G7 and G20 is necessary, and we should seek more convergence through ever closer collaboration between T7 and T20. And fourth and finally, to implement these three things effectively, we need to take advantage of our past experience and the complementarity between the T7 and T20. So continuity and complementarity are the keywords. Okay, I stop here, and I wish you have a very fruitful discussion tonight too. Also, lots of events under T7 Italy. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Dean Sonobe, thank you very much for your opening. I hope that nicely summarized what we tried to achieve, what we did, and what we tried to achieve in this T7 Japan year. And now I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Ai Gonda from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Following her time in Europe, including as Principal Deputy Director for International Science Cooperation, Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Science Department, as well as Counselor at the Embassy of Japan in Austria. She was posted in India as counselor until this September, if I'm not mistaken. As a T7 Japan highlighted the importance of the G7 G20 cooperation, we are delighted to hear remarks from you. Please welcome Ms. Ai Gonda.
Thank you, Ms. Kaori Hitomi, for introducing me. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, everybody. And thank you very much, Dr. Sonobe, ADBI Dean and T7 Japan Chair, for the very informative and conclusive opening remarks. First of all, I would like to pay my deepest respects to the efforts of the Asian Development Bank Institute and participating think tanks of T7 this year. I would like to thank Dean Sonobe and all the participants for giving me this opportunity to speak. Currently, the international community is facing a serious challenge to the international order that supported peace and prosperity in the post-Cold War era, as Russia's aggression against Ukraine continues unabated. In addition, global issues such as climate change and international health are piling up, while a new crisis has emerged in the Middle East, and the international community appears to be further deepening division and confrontation. In light of this current situation in the international community, Japan firmly believes that the rule of law is the foundation of peace and prosperity for all nations. And Japan, as the chair of the G7 this year, has been working to maintain and strengthen a free and open international order based on the rule of law, promoting cooperations with our ally and like-minded countries. And at the same time, we are also making effort to gain broad support and involvement of the international community, including the country's so-called Global South. Now, I would like to point out that T7, as the engagement group of the G7, played an important role in aggregating and disseminating a wide range of knowledge from various stakeholders, including the Global South, in order to resolve various issues facing the international community. And as Dean Sonobe just mentioned, the close collaboration with T20 India, as well as the other engagement groups, was particularly impressive. And I'm delighted that a wide range of inputs have been provided through the T7 process this year. And we believe that the results of these inputs have been passed on to a wider audience. In particular, at the T7 summit in April, the recommendations were presented to Prime Minister Kishida, and he expressed his gratitude for the valuable input and said that he would make effective use of them in preparation for the G7 Hiroshima summit. In order to maintain and strengthen the international order, it is essential to consolidate knowledge beyond the boundaries of the public and private sectors. We believe it is important for think tanks to continue to actively engage in policy discussions and exert a certain degree of influence to the formation of international public opinions and the policy decisions of national governments. I am aware that ISPI and EIE are both leading think tanks in Italy, and they are taking over the chairmanship of T7. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan is looking forward to further working closely with the T7. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Gonda, for your remark and for your time to join us and then also to mark this occasion. Now we are moving to the panel session, which will be moderated by my dear T7 Japan comrade, Nicolas Bouchot. And his official title is Senior Consultant and Advisor to the ADBI Dean. But beyond that, we all know he played a key role in intersecting people and initiatives, probably beyond the traditional sense of the think tank community, to realize our T7 Japan's vision to become a valuable G-track knowledge support mechanism. Nicolas, I leave the rest in your good hands.
Kaori-san, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So in a very limited time frame, we thought we wanted to share together a number of insights from the T7, complementing what Dean Sonobe mentioned and Director Gonda. We will have 3 segments in the discussion. The first one about the T7 G7 as an accelerator of sustainability, especially in those complex times. A second segment about the T7 G7 as an opportunity for new partnerships to deliver on global sustainability agendas. And third, the T7 Italy outlook, because here we are at the handover of the T7 Japan to Italy. And for the first segment, we will be with Anna Katarina Honij, Director of IDOS in Bonn, and also co-chair of Task Force Science and Digitalization for a Better Future, Dr. Shinobu Yamaguchi, Director of the United Nations University Institute for Advanced Studies in Tokyo, and also co-chair of Task Force 2, Wellbeing, Environmental Sustainability and Just Transition, and Jenny Gordon, Honorary Professor at the Australian University in Canberra, National University, and co-chair of the Task Force 4, Peace, Security, and Global Governance. Anna Katarina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolas, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Tetsushi. Thank you, Kaori. Thank you for inviting us, for coming all together once again in this round. And thank you to the colleagues from Italy, of course, for taking it on. So to say, this passing of the bat is nearly becoming a yearly exercise. And there is something very, it becomes a routine, and with this also a reliable and moment that gives us a certain degree of certainty that we can continue this dialogue, and I very much appreciate this. Now, I was asked to give a bit of a sort of looking back, but also then looking, of course, ahead, and I would like to speak here as sort of partly the one of the chairs of the Think 7 process under German presidency, but also, of course, as the chair for the science policy and digitalization task force under the Japanese presidency. And if I look at the activities of the task force on science policy and digitalization under Japanese leadership, I find it worth mentioning. It's in many ways that the discussions here started as part of the German presidency, focusing on questions of science policy development and the role, of course, of the G7 with a strong health focus. No, it was, of course, still very much shaped by the pandemic. We then carried that into the Japanese presidency and continued the discussion as in a way that we brought chairs together representing the African continent, representing also the international research institutes, here the CGIAR system, and through myself, bringing in also the German or sometimes hopefully also European perspective. And we tried to develop the topic in a way that we focused on the one side questions of science system development, on digitalization and the role of digitalization, and third, on innovation systems. And we did that because, of course, always with the logic behind it, that the transformational processes towards sustainable futures are indeed knowledge intensive, and they are indeed technology intensive. And that, of course, challenges us as a world community to reflect on how do we invest into these science and innovation systems, and how do we develop them further also by bringing together basic and applied research, bringing together innovation development that has been enriched by different disciplinary perspectives, that has been developed also through forms of co-production and citizen science. And in many ways, as part of this, the networks for implementation were already developed, at least to the degree that actual implementation can be sought. So this logic of indeed transformational processes being knowledge and technology intensive, of course, also means that we at the moment face a situation where our science systems come together and create a knowledge backbone, but also a certain type of authority that that continues to create actually cleavages in the way we can communicate with each other and negotiate on the level of the United Nations, for instance. And that is harmful. And our position there was always to say, let's think about multilateral funding mechanisms, but also regional funding mechanisms, and reflect on the role of the G7 in fostering, on the one side, discourses, policy discourse on a multilateral level for investments into nationally organized and regionally organized science systems. But let's also nurture these discussions on the level of a number of different UN and multilateral institutions that can then also hopefully carry it more and more into the discussions also within, of course, the G20, but on different national and regional levels. Now, I want to point to a few points that happened since the activities, or were enriched by the activities in the task force under the Think 7 Japanese leadership. We could, as chairs, continue the discussions and carry them into the discussion that takes place as part of the German UNESCO Commission, and then from there in the UNESCO to reflect on how to further shape funding mechanisms within the field of science policy making in ways that North-South inequalities are at least reduced. So equitability in partnership here stands at the center. We are also carrying these discussions right now into the Hamburg Sustainability Conference planning. And we, of course, carry it into a number of discussions also at the European Union level. And I want to very much encourage us to keep that spirit going. And hopefully now I'm looking sort of to the colleagues from Italy, hopefully also continue that work as part of the Italian presidency. Now, two more points, Nicola, if I may. One more point.
Very
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 short. I
briefly.
see you. Yes, I see you. I do want to mention that, of course, taking the understanding that transformational processes to sustainability are knowledge intensive is a point that we also carried into the Agenda 2030 discussions, the halftime discussions. And here it is very, of course, positive to see that the Agenda 2030 was indeed confirmed, but we all know that it's not fully delivering and structural change is needed. And I do want to point here to the bridging that Think 7 fostered with Think 20. No, it's very, very clear that for the field of science policy making, it is absolutely necessary to have these discussions between G7 and G20. And in many ways, I would also argue that this bridging activity, and I also here look in the direction of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bellagio format. Thank you for making this possible. But these bridging activities carried these discussions into the Delhi communique as well. And in many ways also there then had an impact on the reform discussions of the World Bank and the IMF. The understanding that the structures of multilateralism have to actually change in order to then invest also into the systems that make transformational processes possible, and the science systems here are part of this. Last point, Nicola, if you now look into the Beyond 2030 discussions, I want to encourage us to reflect on our learnings and carry into the discussions that indeed a comprehensive common agenda is needed, but it needs to also deliver. And we have learned that for delivering it, we require a number of structural changes on the multilateral level. So let's think jointly about, also as part of the Italian presidency, maybe if that is possible, let's think about the question whether this comprehensive agenda for the future has to be negotiated within the frame of the United Nations General Assembly or beyond. No? So bringing here together also the international financial institutions, regional banks, and of course the club governance formats such as the G7 and the G20. Thank you.
Anna Katarina, thank you very much for setting up the scene so comprehensively. Just reminding us of the limited time that we have, and we have 31 minutes left for this excellent handover. I would now ask Dr. Yamaguchi for a brief comment from the point of view of the United Nations University, and you might be also want to comment briefly on the issues of the G7 planetary boundaries, and then Jenny Gordon, especially about the issues of how this can also interact, how can we interact about sustainability on the one hand and global risk management through the G7, T7. Dr. Yamaguchi, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair, and distinguished colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. And as the director of the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, it is my very much honor to address you today, the marking the handover of the Think 7 from Japan to Italy. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate. First of all, I'd like to express our deep appreciation to Dean Sonobe of the Asian Development Bank Institute and our partner institute for their extraordinary achievement during the T7 Japan. And Dean Sonobe's leadership and dedication have been stimulating our global research, the collaboration. So thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. And we are very much proud of the achievement made in providing very important policy recommendation for G7 countries and partners based on the robust research and collaboration. I am very much proud of our structure and organization joined by the excellent and expert and researchers. And so the United Nations University, our involvement in the T7 Japan Summit to focus on a task force to well-being, environmental sustainability, and just transition, which I believe the most relevant and urgent issues to be tackled among other issues. Evidently, as the UN Secretary General mentioned during the SDG Summit this September, global solidarity is necessary to bring in the innovative solution for a more sustainable future. And I believe this T7, T20 collaboration can serve as a brilliant platform for such innovation, linking the different sustainability development goals and goals. So reflecting on our engagement with T7, I would like to emphasize just a 4-point, especially our policy recommendation called for 4 major actions. 1, to deliver universal access to carbon neutral energy systems. 2, to ensure the sustainable food systems and biodiversity conservation. And 3, to synergizing resilience and social protection. And most importantly, 4, to enhance measurement for well-being. And through a series of engagement of T7 this year, we confirmed that the just transition is a key to breakthrough solution for achieving multiple SDGs simultaneously, because it embodies the important principle of leaving no one behind when promoting a greener and more sustainable the world. Therefore, the determined effort are very much needed to strengthen social safety net, particularly for the workers in carbon-intensive industries, to mitigate disruptions caused by the transition. So the policymakers, we recommended in our the issue paper that policymakers should really promote employability through training and reskilling programs through continuing education of the citizens. So in concluding, the UNIS, we continue to mobilize our expertise, policy-oriented research, educational programs, and partnership to advance this agenda, building on the outcome of the T7 Japan. And specifically this September, we launched a new postgraduate degree specialization for the Paris Agreement. This is very much to implemented in collaboration with our partner institutions in the UN systems and academia. So I would like everyone really to collaborate with us with your expertise. So we look forward for the future, the further developing innovative initiatives in achieving a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient future. And I would love to collaborate further with the colleagues from the Italy with their expertise. And I look very much forward to our next meeting together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yamaguchi. And we can hear that from Anakata Hinaojin and yourself, the fact that the T7 doesn't work as a standalone, but the acceleration of sustainability go through a number of initiatives that each of the organizations around the table could further implement, take, push, or initiate, linked with the common findings in the think tanks arena. Jenny Gordon, the floor is yours. May I ask, I will repeat that for each of us to be very, very concise, because our time is extremely limited, but your inputs were also very, very strong. So please share a few notes about your views on how this T7 has served as an accelerator of sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have to start by just saying how what an honor it was to be part of this whole process, and what a wonderful job that the ADBI team did pulling it all together. And just to acknowledge my co-chairs, Antonio Villafranca, who of course is very much involved in Italy's next T7, and Syed Munir Kasri, who are also chairing this interesting topic of peace, security, and global governance. Not small things, and so challenging also because we had a strong focus on how the G7 could work with the G20. And clearly when you come down to current conflicts, you have some differences of opinions between the countries of the G7 and countries within the G20. And so we wanted to focus on where the points of commonality were rather than where the points of conflict would be, and the fundamental causes of instability. And it's instability that disrupt peace. And it's also good governance is an essential part of getting stability, but it's really hard to get stability without good governance. So we were looking at that kind of package and how they fit together. And so one of the key things, I have to, wear my colors, I'm an economist, is competition for resources. And so when you have competition for resources and you have a history of that competition over centuries sometimes, then you have difficult situations. So how do we resolve these? What are the mechanisms that we can bring? And we need to focus on prosperity. One of the most important mechanisms we've had over the last sort of 5 decades for prosperity has been this move to globalization, to international cooperation, to international trade, to mutual engagement that is beneficial. And it's maintaining that is going to be about delivering comprehensive security. And so when we talk about comprehensive security, we're thinking about all the elements of it. It's about human security. It's about, do people have, a livelihood? Do they have access to healthcare? Do they have access to education? Do they have stability? Do they have kind of, the strategic security? Do they have that economic security? And those bringing together how we can actually think about what we can do when we're faced with so many more challenges. And we're faced with the challenges of growing inequality, which unfortunately is the way markets work. They don't care about distribution. So governments have to care about distribution because markets don't. We worry about infectious diseases because of climate change, but also the greater interconnections and movement of people. We worry about the environmental risks driven by climate change, but also by, environmental degradation. And then what the policy responses to this are. And this is what our focus really was. It's how do you advise governments on more effective policy responses that will move towards long-term solutions rather than policy responses that kind of appeal to people because they think they're going to fix the problems in the short run. And so we took this approach. And so what we're concerned about is the sort of tend towards policies towards nationalism driven, crackdown on media, protectionism, geofragmentation. And so our recommendations were moving away to try and say, you're not going to turn the boat fast, but you've got to start changing direction. And the G7 plays a really important role in this. And the G7 working with the G20, if the G7 don't show that they do it, why shouldn't they expect the global south and the countries in the G20 to be making those same kind of efforts to kind of turn that boat? And to really focus on dealing with some of the really big current risks that are out there. And one obviously is the debt crisis. And we're still not got any closer yet to resolutions. But, debt service suspension initiative was a good start, but the common framework is not delivering. And it's only going to deliver for low income countries, even if you can get it working. And what about middle income countries? We really need that to be resolved so you can then start mobilizing finance for the green transformation. So you're not going to get movement on one without movement on the other. And it's about really starting to see the global system as a complex system that needs to work together to actually be able to resolve the kinds of problems that we have and the challenges that we have to security and hence to peace. And so one of the really important things that we recommended was around scaling up financing to actually support these challenges, and that G7 should not only take the leadership on their policy domestically, but also take that leadership on really scaling up financing for all the challenges that a lot of the other task forces were actually talking about. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Excellent. And may I also add that creating this special task force on peace, security, and global governance was also a challenge because this is not on the usual radar of neither T20 or T7. So we try to also innovate in that regard. So let's continue our discussion this morning about partnerships to deliver on such shared or sometimes diverging agendas. I will start with President Kazuhiko Takeuchi, who is in the T7 Advisory Board, and with Sachin Chaturvedi, the Director of General of RIS in Delhi, Deepali Khanna, the Vice President of the Rockefeller Foundation for Asia, and Christian Karstrup with the Global Solutions Initiative. And may I really kindly remind ourselves to be extremely concise, even though I must understand this is also frustrating. President Takeuchi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicholas, for your introduction. Esteemed colleagues and participants, good morning in Italy and good evening in Japan. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, in short, IGES. My name is Kazuhiko Takeuchi. I'm the president of IGES and a member of the T7 Japan Advisory Board. We are now at the critical point for global sustainability. For the 2030 agenda, for example, we have made some significant socio-economic progress in the Asia-Pacific region, where IGES is based. However, in terms of the environmental dimensions, we are falling behind, especially regressing on climate action. To accelerate toward a more sustainable world, we need integration, inclusion, and localized action. The G7 collectively and the individual G7 member states are positioned to lead this effort through partnerships. First, please allow me to speak about the integration. Maximizing synergies and minimizing trade-offs across climate and other SDGs are essential to advancing global sustainability agendas. In promoting the climate agenda, we must integrate biodiversity conservation, especially SDGs 14 and 15. A stable climate and biodiversity-rich ecosystems are essential foundations for human livelihood. Both climate and biodiversity require rapid and synergetic actions to avoid irreversible consequences. In addition to this, as one T7 policy brief involving IGES authors states, there is an opportunity and a need to leverage the connections between climate and social issues, including social protection and health, quality education for all, and gender equity. The T7 has served and must continue to serve as the scientific voices of synergetic actions on these sustainability agendas. Second, inclusion is also a critical component for progress on global sustainability. We must empower all actors, including those currently marginalized or disadvantaged, to help shape the future we want as a society. The G7 must actively work with diverse actors to ensure a just transition domestically, we are also collectively advocating globally for environmental justice. Third, while the sustainability agenda we are tackling are global, localized action is ultimately necessary. Implementation begins on the ground. Each G7 member state must foster bottom-up and participatory approaches through partnerships with local governments and other stakeholders. This will allow tailored solutions that are relevant to local contexts to be implemented. This collection of innovation cases and lessons learned can be shared among and even beyond the G7 to inspire further actions on the ground. There is much work to do, and we cannot do it alone. The world needs the leadership of the G7 to integrate the various global sustainability agendas, foster more inclusive participation in decision-making, and supports localized action. As a part of the T7, IGES will continue to actively share knowledge and contribute to discussions to shape our shared future. Let's work together to create a future we want. Thank you very much.
President Takushi, thank you very much, and also for insisting on the local dimensions of our work. I will pass it to Sachin Chaturvedi, the Director General of RIS in Delhi, who also was, or is at this moment still a member of the core group of the T20 India. Sachin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicholas. Yes, we still have almost 2 weeks now to finish and pass it on. But of course, we are doing it next week when we meet in Cape Town and connect with our T20 successor team from Brazil. So that we would be there. But let me, Nicola, at the outset, congratulate you and the team at ADBI, led so ably by Dean Sonobe-san, who has made a genuine effort and very substantive effort to connect T7 with T20. And as was very rightly recommended by Anna Katarina, the effort has been to reinvent ourselves. And thanks to the leadership Dipali has shared with us and provided to all of us the magnificent opportunity of exploring the commonalities and exploring points of strength and not differences. And fortunately, we could move forward several common agreements, and the points have emerged very well in terms of how we see the good governance and the ability to deliver the programs that are important. And I think issues that are related to the debt crisis, issues which are related to going beyond GDP and well-being, and also technology and finance, particularly their connect with ethics, I think are some dimensions of our work program which are important in the way we reduce transaction costs and bring forward infrastructure financing in the most substantive manner for consolidation of finance and avoiding the green finance, SDG aligned finance, and what other categories are there to consolidate it. So I think this effort and endeavor of G7 and G20, T7 and T20 coming together to resolve the mega global challenges that we are facing, which are largely aberration of our idea of good governance. So for good governance, the elements that are needed for at global level, I think think tank leaders have to come together and evolve perspectives that are there. I congratulate ADBI and all the very best wishes to our colleagues. I can see Antonio here, but to all our Italian colleagues for their very substantive contribution. We all saw that during G20 in most difficult times. I'm sure G7 would be, if not a cakewalk, would not be very difficult for them to deliver. So my best wishes to them. Thank you, Nicola, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sachin. And let me also underline how important the support of the T20 India core group has been to foster this new direction of bridging T7, T20, G7, G20 in particular, Sachin, thanks to you and RIS. Deeply, you have also been instrumental in supporting this approach and in developing the thesis of the task force about development in the T7. Also, you were not initially really with a think tank, but a foundation that works with think tanks. So we'd very much like to hear about your impressions and main takeaways very shortly. Again, thank you very much, Deepali. The floor is yours.
So dear members of the global think tank community, it is truly an honor to be here with you today. I would like to, of course, begin by expressing my gratitude to Dean Sonobe, Think7 Japan lead chair, and Nicholas, senior advisor to the lead chair, ADBI, for extending me the opportunity in my capacity as the co-chair of T7 Task Force 1, which is looking at development and economic prosperity. What an enriching journey it has been. My co-chairs, Dr. Dilda Rahut and Dr. Abla Latif, have been incredible allies in this journey, along with John Burney and Ritu Saha. And I would like to express my gratitude to all of them for keeping our exchanges stimulating and always pushing us to think about the well-being of those who may not have a seat at the table, which is really important in all our discussions. Before I delve into my key messages for this important event, on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation, I must also extend my heartiest congratulations to Antonio, you as Director of Studies and co-head of the Europe and Global Governance Center, ISPI, along with Ettore Greco, Executive Vice President, IAI, for your successful appointment as the co-chairs of Think 7 Italy. I'm confident that under your leadership, the Think 7 community will ladder up and pave the way for greater cooperation and exchanges between the Think 7 members, as well as the members of the Think 7 and Think 20. We meet at a moment of polycrisis, but also of emerging opportunities. On one hand, the world is reckoning with the consequences of unsustainable and inequitable economic growth, the adverse impacts of COVID-19, increasing geopolitical tensions, and an exasperating climate crisis, all of which are most strongly felt by the Global South. On the other hand, I see positive developments such as the historic consensus reached during the G20 summit in New Delhi, the details of which were shared with us by Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, who did such an amazing job as a member of the T20 India core group. The Indian G20 presidency made it clear that there will be no compromise between fighting poverty and fighting the climate crisis. And themes such as ensuring growth, getting sustainable development goals back on track, battling the climate crisis, reforming multilateral development banks, managing the debt crisis, and giving a voice to the Global South dominate the letter and spirit of the declaration. The African Union's entry into the G20 group is a critical and historic step in the direction of inclusivity. As the batons of G20 and G7 presidencies are passed on Brazil and Italy respectively, we must not lose this momentum. In fact, we really need to be harnessing all our energy to really be pushing these things more cohesively and really ensure that we continue to break away from the siloed working and taking active steps in the direction of greater cooperation, inclusivity, and equity. We at the Rockefeller Foundation are deploying these very principles to move closer towards our mission of making opportunity universal and sustainable. To that end, we have made significant strides during the last 1 year. Of course, the most important one was really working with the Indian G20 presidency. And we've been working very closely through our health teams and innovative finance teams to really see how we can be really paving the path where we can institutionalize pandemic preparedness, improve coverage for digital health solutions, as well as enable the creation of a global South-led agenda for re-architecting the global financial order on the lines of the Bridgetown Initiative, in which the foundation already played a very pivotal role. We've also been deeply engaged with groups such as Business 20 for making practical recommendations to the presidency for unlocking additional dollars from the private sector for climate action. On the G7 side, as I mentioned, we were involved with the task force and also try to create opportunities for the T7 and T20 groups to come together, whether it was at a Bellagio Center or at the UN General Assembly sidelines. So the foundation also, in partnership with the Global Alliance for Impact Networks, has institutionalized the Global South Impact Community, or GSIC, which is a group of senior leaders from public, private, and philanthropic institutions across the Global South to surface bold ideas and really urge collaborative action that puts emerging economies at the center of COVID-19 recovery and climate crisis and amplifies the perspectives of the Global South. The group recently convened in Paris and is again going to convene at COP28 to really try and see how we can break down silos between the various capital providers and ignite new collaborations that advance the flow of capital for a just transition. We continue to believe that global platforms and movements such as the G20 and the G7, and by extension, the Think 7 and Think 20 forums will continue to shape the agenda for the future of tomorrow. Think tanks such as ISPI, IAI, and ADBI are the powerhouses of knowledge that will lead this movement from the front and show us the way. We at the foundation are committed to enable and solidify the exchange of knowledge between the think tank community and the rest of the civil society, especially capital providers, including governments. Knowledge creation rooted in scientific knowledge and innovation will continue to be a key lever of change for all of us. So we stand committed to really ensure how we can get the different groups together. And lastly, in our bid to really accelerate the momentum of T7, G7 Japan, and T20, G20 India into a more lasting legacy, we will continue to align our priority areas and strategy in line with the global priorities, and especially those of the Global South. In fact, the foundation recently announced over $1 billion over the next 5 years to advance a global climate transition and help ensure everyone can participate in it. So as the Think7 Japan hands over this bigger opportunity for change to Think7 Italy, the need for ensuring more collaboration between the preceding T7 and T20, and the opportunity presented by such diverse actors coming together much more pronounced. I will watch out for the powerful voices present in this room today as the world makes room for a new economic, social, and financial order. I want us to remember that history is not written, it is forged. It is upon us to nurture new possibilities for our future generations, founded on tenets of inclusivity, shared responsibility, and cooperation that goes beyond lip service. And I'm very, very excited to be part of this group and part of this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dipali, and I hope that together with you, we will continue developing this Bellagio format of cooperation that was mentioned also earlier by Dean Sonobe. Thank you so much. So just some household issues before I pass it on to Christian Kastrop and to our Italian colleagues to apologize because we are a few minutes behind schedule, but I think also the contributions are very, very substantial this morning, not just formal. And that I'm looking at Antonio Villafranca and President Nelly Ferrocci, and especially Tommaso Mure. I know you have a very packed schedule this morning. If we have an extra 5-6 minutes after the hour, that would allow to fully explore the dimensions of passing the baton to our colleagues from Italy. But with no further ado, I will pass it to Christian, just maybe to express the vision that the Global Solutions Initiative has of this bridging the G7, G20 and contributing to those joint efforts. Christian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And of course, I will try to be really quick to give more space to Antonio because they take over, and big welcome to our Italian friends to do that. So, you know, Global Solutions Initiative is a knowledge-based, informed do tank. So we are not an entire think tank. We try to bring people together to talk about global commons and shared problems. So we will work on this transformation process, which is a very broad thing. It's about economics, it's about politics, it's about global finance, and we have to include civil society, businesses, politics, and of course, feature a new global governance fully consistent with the interests of the Global South, and that this is really needed. And we try to do this in a specific and in a holistic way and to bring you together. And therefore, we will meet again for the next Global Solutions Summit, where all of you are welcome and all your friends at the 6th and 7th May in Berlin at our used place. You probably know it. So bringing together people, we will have also some new formats, bringing people together. We will have the Chancellor again. And so I'm rather optimistic that we can be a facilitator of all what has been said by my very excellent pre-speakers. There is some hope that we have a meeting now between President Xi and President Biden. I also have been in China very recently, and I think we really had the impression that there is an issue if we simply try to start with those things where we can all agree on, because it is an entire transformation need for the planet. I think there was some acceptance of that, or a lot of acceptance of that, and I think it wasn't just lip service. So I think we have to do quite a lot. I will stop here and hand over to the Italian friends, and I hope to see most of you in Berlin. Thank you, and also a big thank you to Nicolas and the Japanese team, of course.
Thank you very much, Christian, and maybe just underline that the way that we have been working through the T7 Japan was largely inspired by what IDOS and GSI initiated the year before in terms of format and directions. So thank you again. So now passing on the floor to our colleagues from Italy about the G7, T7 Italy outlook. With no further ado, Antonio Villafranca, the floor is yours. You have been also co-chair in the T7 Japan, and you will be co-chair of the T7 Italy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. It's really my pleasure to have so many friends and to see so many friends and colleagues all together this morning in Italy, at least. Let me first thank ADBI for the great job they've done, and in particular, of course, Dean Sonobe, but let me also mention, Nicolas, your efforts and Kaori's work and all the team from ADBI. Of course, what we are going to do in Italy, we meaning ISPI in Milan and EI in Rome, as we have been asked by the Italian Sherpa to co-chair the T7 Italy. What we are going to do, of course, is strictly in line with what has been done so far by T7 Japan, and before that, of course, T7 Germany. Let me very briefly tell you something about the organization, the timing of T7 Italy. As, of course, T7 Japan did this year, we are going to have 4 task forces, one on peace, security, and multilateralism, another one on global finance and economics, with these 2 task forces coordinated by ISPI directly, and the other 2 task forces on digital and green transformation, which will be coordinated directly by EI. Ambassador Nelly Feroce, of course, will tell us more after my presentation. The second thing I would like to point out is that, of course, we want to engage as many people as possible, even if we will keep, as it was again in T7 Japan, the number of policy briefs relatively low. So co-authorship will be absolutely encouraged. Then we are going to send out our call for policy brief abstracts by the end of November, and by early December, also the T7 Italy website will be available. We are now planning the inception conference of T7 Italy in late January. Then for February to May, early May, we are going to co-host, possibly with you, some workshops and events in the context of T7 Italy, and we are scheduling our T7 summit in May, 1 month before the G7 summit. We are now in the process of identifying co-chairs of the task forces and, of course, members of the International Advisory Board. For any additional information and also, for instance, for being directly engaged in the T7 Italy, you can, of course, refer to ISPI or EI. In any case, we will send out an email to all our mailing list worldwide, and you are, of course, invited to interact with us and be engaged in the process of T7 Italy. Let me just finish before I leave the floor to Ambassador Nelly Feroce, a few words about the 2 task forces which will be coordinated by ISPI. The first one on peace, security, and global governance. We have already identified the Italian lead co-chair, who is Antonio Missiroli. Antonio is an ISPI senior advisor, and he has a long-lasting experience in international organization, in particular in the EU institutions. The subtopics of this task force are mostly focused on strengthening multilateralism and multi-stakeholder partnership. This way, of course, we would like to include diverse voices and empowering people from different worlds, from iOS, NGOs, business community, the youth. And of course, in this, another key subtopic of this task force will be security issues, including, of course, cyber security. There is no hiding that a lot of attention will be drawn during the Italian G7 by the wars, the conflicts that we have today from Ukraine to Israel. As to the second task force, which will be coordinated by ISPI, the future of global economy, so economics and finance, we will in particular focus on geopolitics, so trade and supply chain, and on finance and infrastructure, while all the issues related to sustainability and green transition will be covered in the specific task force, which is coordinated by EI. So maybe I spoke too much. So without further ado, Nicholas, I would leave immediately the floor to the president of EI, Ambassador Nelly Ferrucci.
Thank you very much, Antonio, and then to Assistant Chair Tommaso Mure before closing note from Dean Sonobe. Ambassador Ferrucci, the floor is yours. Yeah, I think you are on mute.
Thank you, and I also like to add my word of thanks and congratulations to ADBI and to Dr. Sonobe, his team, for the splendid way in which they have organized T7 under the Japanese presidency. As Antonio Villafranca has anticipated, this year IAI and ISPI together will collaborate in the organization of T7. It's not a new formula. We have tested this formula of collaboration between our two institutes during the T7 in 2020, T20 in 2021 during the Italian presidency. And I would also like to add to the information very useful that Antonio has anticipated on how we are organizing our proceedings of the T7, two remarks in particular. The first one is that, as Antonio said, we have received a mandate by the Office of the Prime Minister and the Sherpa to coordinate the proceedings of T7, and we will continue to work in close collaboration with the G7 presidency so as to make it possible that our policy recommendations will usefully contribute to the agenda of the G7. I think this is the main purpose of an engagement group like ours. The second is a message that I have registered and recorded from our discussion of today, the need to maintain a strict collaboration between T7 and T20. I think this is a very welcome recommendation. We will do our best to ensure that this collaboration is maintained and guaranteed. Now, as far as the organization of task forces, IAI will coordinate two of them. We have decided to have 4 task forces as well during the T7 under Italian presidency. IAI will coordinate a task force on what we have called global common goods in transition, which will cover many different aspects that include energy transition and security, climate and environmental policy and finance, climate change and migration policy, debt sustainability, poverty and inequality alleviation, food security, and global health. Quite many different issues, but I think all of them are relevant for the T7, G7 agenda. The chair of this task force will be ensured by Dr. Dario Scannapieca, who is the CEO of Cassa Depositi and Prestiti, the most important public development bank in Italy. The second task force will concentrate on science and digitalization for a better future, and the subject matter that will be dealt with within this task force are the following: global cooperation for ensuring the benefit from digital technologies, digital infrastructures and connectivity, artificial intelligence, which will be one of the main topics of the G7 agenda, cybersecurity and data privacy, role of technology and innovation for sustainable and inclusive human development. So these are the very preliminary indication of our program of work. We very much hope to be able to involve as many as possible of the persons and experts and academicians that have been working during the Japanese T7 And I again thank you, the Japanese team, for organizing this handover event. Thank you again.
Thank you, President Nelly Ferrocci. Antonio, I understand you have one more information.
Yes, my fault. I forgot to mention also the lead co-chair of our second task force on the future of global economy, who is Carlo Altomonte. Carlo is our senior research fellow and professor at the Bocconi University. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And also, Ferdinando,
I also forgot the name of the chair of our second task force. The second task force will be chaired by Professor Francesco Profumo, at present president of a bank foundation, of Intesa San Paolo Foundation, but in the past he was also a minister for education and research in an Italian government. Thank you.
And lead co-chair during the T20 Italy. Thank you very much. So, Tommaso, thank you very much for understanding the need to develop our issues a bit beyond what was initially scheduled in terms of timing. The floor is yours before wrapping up this excellent discussion this morning. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here today. For those who do not know me, my name is Tommaso Mouret, and I have the honor and the pleasure of working in the Sherpa office in the Prime Minister Office of Italy, and with the Ambassador Ferrari, who's the G7 and G20 Sherpa, and Councillor Panebianco, the Sous Sherpa. First of all, thank you. Congratulations to the ADBI for the great work this year. I think that 16 policy brief, 14 issue papers, and one communique, they prove the importance of the work that you carry out. I'll try to briefly give you a broad picture of where the Italian presidency will go next year, or at least where for the actual state of discussions, where the G7 come from and where we're going to. So in the last years, there is no doubt that the G7 has become the control tower of Western democracy in facing systemic challenges to the international system and to those rules, shared rules that the international community gave itself after the World War II and the Cold War. In this capacity, let's say in this evolution that we saw, particularly after the Ukraine Russian aggression to Ukraine, we saw the role of the G7 growing in this let's say control coordination role of Western democracy in facing more and more systemic threats like geoeconomic, political, environmental challenges, but also technological. Italy takes the helm of this process from the 1st of January in this increasingly complex scenario. And of course, these are challenges that cannot be fixed 1 year. So we will work in continuity with the great work that was carried out by the Japanese presidency. So no doubt we will continue to focus on Ukraine. We will continue to work on key issues under the Japanese presidency, such as economic security and resilience. We do believe that COVID-19, but also again the consequences on 1 second, sorry. So the consequences of the war. There is no doubt that it was an eye-opener on how being overly dependent on one single actors can be dangerous, and that we need to somehow diversify our supply chains and global value chains. We will continue, of course, to work on global issues like, and there is a strong alignment with those that were mentioned by Ambassador Nelly Ferrocci, such as food security, global health, environment, energy security, climate change, but also new and rising issues on the international arena, such as artificial intelligence. This is a topic on which Prime Minister Meloni was very interested. She mentioned that in Hiroshima. She spoke about it in the G20 in Delhi. And the work that we intend to carry is somehow make sure, having discussions on how do we make sure that these technologies are developed and deployed at the service of humankind, that they enhance the well-being and enhance our democracies and well-being of our societies, and most importantly, how we can develop some ethical guardrails, making sure that, of course, the humankind and mankind stays at the center of their development. This will be, of course, the Italian presidency, so we will also look at it from a national perspective. Italy, because of its geographical position and its history, is of course very engaged in the issues concerning the broader Mediterranean region and the African continent. So we will look at this region of the world because we do believe that many of the challenges that the G7 and the G20 face together can be also addressed working together with African partners on an equal footing, and for sure they cannot be fully addressed without having a broader engagement with the developing countries. As you know, Italy is developing the Mattei Plan, which is, I would call it a broader and systemic cooperation framework on how we can enhance cooperation with the African continent on several key issues such as energy security, migration, and development. The idea here is to somehow rethink on how we cooperate with these actors, developing partnerships where I think that the key word is mutually beneficial partnership, so that we engage again on an equal footing with these countries rather than having a one-sided paternalistic approach. And on that, I think the Prime Minister Meloni has been publicly mentioning this aspect in several occasions. Our work, of course, will also take into account what has been done so far by the Italian government, and I think about the so-called Rome process. That is a process that we launched during the Migration and Development Conference last July. And again, this is all these processes, the common thread among all these processes is how we can, again, enhance cooperation with this region, look at the shared challenges, and how we can find common solutions that can be mutually beneficial. One last remark on the method, because this has been mentioned by Dean Tetsushi Sonobe, but by also many actors on the need to engage with the developing countries or with countries that are with a broader, let's say, membership than the G7, the so-called Global South, if we want. So we will for sure continue engaging with these countries, again, knowing that the G7 can play an important role, but cannot address these challenges alone. And another aspect that is kind of important, and here I go back to our cooperation with the T7, is the dialogue with different stakeholders. All the challenges that I briefly mentioned are extremely complex, and they need the involvement of these various stakeholders that are not just governmental ones, but they're also civil society and private sector. So we will for sure continue our engagement, and this is why we do believe it's very important also having a dialogue with the T7. I will close again congratulating with the ADBI for the great work, and wishing all the best to the Italian Institute for International Political Studies with Director Villafranca, but also the Institute for International Affairs with Ambassador Nelly Feroci. Thank you very much for having me here, and we look forward to continuing our cooperation under our presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommaso, for your very clear message and for ensuring this link between T7 and G7, but also with the Global South and the G20. So here we are at the closing moment of our discussion. I will pass it on to Dean Tetsushi Sonobe for a word of thanks, but we are already, and I do apologize, somewhat behind schedule, unless Kaori-san, you had one last message. Thank you very much for all the panelists and the wonderful insights.
Okay, so from me, maybe 2 minutes, less than 2 minutes. So today, we looked back at the T7 Japan and heard about the outlook of the G7, T7 Italy 2024. As several speakers pointed out, the world faces many difficult and profound policy challenges. To address those challenges, policy recommendations based on evidence and out-of-box thinking are indispensable. So that implies that T7 is expected to play a critically important role. Hence, our Italian colleagues are under pressure. But I'd like to say, don't worry, to Ettore and Antonio. I'm sure that the T7 Italy will be enormously successful because of the high ability and motivation of our Italian colleagues, and because of the strong willingness of think tanks from across the world to help the T7 Italy succeed. Now I conclude by thanking all the speakers and participants and saying to the co-chairs, please enjoy hosting the T7, and saying to all the other participants, including myself, let's experience the joy of working together at the T7. Okay, thank you very much, and goodbye.